Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Mongrels Garage. I'm Brent, and today we're back at my buddy Chris's house where we're going to finally tackle that leaky intake manifold. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to replace the engine. Stick with us. So, what are we going to replace that tired 289 with? Fresh 302 Windsor that we're going to build right here on the channel. You can already see that we've laid in our bearings for our crankshaft. Chris did that. I did have to correct him on a couple little minor details, but hey, that's Chris is not mechanically inclined for the most part, and I'm slightly better. So
I mean well, though. I mean well.
The second thing we need to address is there is a specific order that these bearings have to go in. Well, at least one of them. And I'm going to grab the cap right here. Now, we get a close-up of this, Chris, and I'll show him a regular cap as well. Whoop,
I'll just throw the bolts on the ground.
I'll just put that anywhere. So looking at these two caps, you can see that this is slightly machined here, and this one is not, okay? This is because this gets the thrust bearing on it. So the difference between thrust bearing and a regular bearing, you can see that right there. You can see it has an edge on it. These do not. So we're gonna have to switch this bearing out. That's the minor mistake that Chris made. We'll fix that, and then we'll get it all put together, get the crank in there, see if we can get this thing to rotate freely, and then we'll move on to some of the other stuff. Okay, we're just gonna show you how to install the bearing into the cap. You can see it's got this cutout on one side, and the bearing has the notch on one side. So you're gonna slide that notch into the bearing, and then you're gonna press your bearing in. Now sometimes it's gonna take a little bit of force, so I'm gonna have to use both hands, but you get the idea, and you want it flush here and here. And then we'll put it into the block, and away we go. So once we've got all the shells installed, the next thing we want to do is we want to put some assembly lube in there and get these nice and lubed up before we set the crank in place. So we're going to do that next. Now we have already checked all our clearances on the bearings. There's a couple ways you can do that. One, you can torque down the caps. You put a dial indicator in here. You can measure the diameter, and then you can measure the diameter on the appropriate crank journal, and then you're looking for the difference between the two. The other way you can do it with it is a piece of plastic gauge where you can put it under the cap and you torque it down, and it'll squish so much, and then you'll compare it to the chart that the plastic gauge comes in. It comes in a paper wrapper and it's got markings on it. So we've already done all that. You can look up a YouTube video or something to see how to do that. We've already got all our clearances checked. We know we're good. So we're going to continue assembling here. Now when putting the caps on, there's a few things you have to pay attention to. The first thing is the orientation of the cap. You see the cap is marked with the arrow that goes to the front of the engine, the crankshaft snout, and it's marked with the numbers, so the position it goes in, starting from the front, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The rear one's pretty obvious. You can see that's quite a bit different than the other caps. And this thrust bearing is pretty obvious also, again, quite a bit different from the other caps because it's got the thrust bearing in it. So this is at the back, this is number 3. We'll start putting the caps in place. There's 1 arrow pointing forward, 2, 3. Actually, I'm going to put a little lube on the thrust bearing surface. You also see that we have this stud here. This is for your pickup tube. So you're going to want to make sure that's in the right place. There we go, 3. Now we're going to hold off on the rear one for now, because the rear on this engine has a 1-piece seal. What we want to do is we want to put that seal in place before we put that rear cap on, because we don't have the tool for knocking it in place afterwards. So we'll slide the rear seal in, then we'll put the cap on, but you gotta be very careful about it. There's a couple ways you can do this. If you got the proper tool, you can just knock the rear seal in after it's all assembled. If you don't, then you can do what we're gonna do, and we're gonna slide the seal in first, and then we're gonna bolt the cap down on top. So that's how we're gonna do it. We'll catch up with you in a bit. I want to put some lube on the bolts. Put a little bit on the thread and a little bit under the head. The torque specs for these are 60 to 70. We're going to step them up, meaning we're going to start with around 40, then 50, then 70 type thing. And your torque specs may vary depending on the fasteners you're using and the type of lubricant you're using. For this, we're using just the standard Ford 302 bolts. So with a little bit of light lubricant, then the torque spec is 60 to 70. If you're using ARP studs and Molly lube or something like that, or Ultra Torque lube or some type of other brand, then you're likely going to change your torque specs, and you're going to have to see what that manufacturer recommends. So just be careful, otherwise you're going to change the clamping force on the cap. But we're going to get ahead. The best thing to do is a little cap of oil, something like that, just standard motor oil, and a little brush, and brush it on your bolt, and then stick it in. Put a little under the head, some on the shaft and the threads. So here we go. Okay, I don't know how well it's going to show this on the time lapse, but if you look when I was torquing, I started in the middle, torqued one side of the cap, then the other side of the cap. Then I moved on to the cap on the other side of it, and then I moved back to the cap on the opposite side of it. And then I came to the front cap, and then the next would be the back cap. I haven't done the back one yet because I'm still waiting for Chris to get back with the rear ring seal. And then I went and I repeated that pattern with the next. So I started at about, I think 40 foot-pounds, then we went to 55, and then 70, and we just repeated that sequence. And now I want to make sure that we're not bound up. As we assemble, we want to make sure everything's still turning nice, which it's turning beautifully, which is awesome. That's exactly what we want. So when Chris gets back with the seal kit, we'll put the rear main seal in, we'll get the rear cap on, and we'll get into putting the pistons and stuff. Now, while he's gone, I can probably roll this over and start on the piston rings and check what our end gap is or on those. So I might get to doing that. Okay, we're going to put our rear main seal in, and you can see that this side is flat. This side has a channel in it. That channel goes in towards the crankshaft, and the oil pressure can get in there and help keep it sealed. The other thing we did is we don't want any leaks out of this, and if you choose to do this, you can. If you don't want to, that's fine. But we put a little bit of RTV or gasket sealer maker on the seal itself. We're going to slide it in. Now, there is a tool for putting these in afterwards, and you can see we lubed up the inside really good. But it's easier just to do this now and slide that sucker in there. There we go. We're seated up pretty good there. And we'll just put a little more RTV there and just a little dab down in the corners here, and that'll help us get it sealed up really good and hopefully prevent any leaks, because these things are kind of prone to leaking, and Chris doesn't want his new engine leaking at all. So otherwise I'm going to hear about it for a very long time. Isn't that right, Chris?
It'll be better than you.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to continue on. I'll put just a touch more sealant on there, a touch down here. Then we'll gently put this cap on, and what we're going to look for when we're putting the cap on is to make sure it doesn't squeeze the seal out. So we're going to just rock it on real slow, keep an eye on it. Should be fine. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to get these rings in here, and they're filed to fit. But if you look at them carefully, there's a top ring and a bottom ring, and they're different colors. one has a dot, one doesn't. The dot indicates that it's got a beveled edge to it. That's for helping to scrape the oil. Now, these rings are made out of different material, so these are filed to fit, and you got one's harder than the other. So one's going to take a few more turns to file down, one's going to take a few less. So if you get in a rhythm with one ring, don't think it's going to be the same for the other. So we're going to be careful of that. These are filed to fit. We're gonna, because this is board 30 over, we're gonna be shooting for about 20 thou ring end clearance. So what we need to do is we need to pop the ring in, and how we do that is we're gonna put a little oil in the cylinder. Just at the top. We don't need a lot. We don't want to be scraping up our cylinder too much. We're going to put our ring in. Now, I like to just kind of scoot them in like that and then give them a twist. I find that's the easiest way to do it. We're going to take our piston to square up the ring. That's probably a little too deep, but that's okay. We're going to take our feeler gauge. We're going to put it in the gap, and there we go. Right at 20 thou. That's exactly where we want to be. Perfect. You do the same thing with this ring. Now, if we need to take some material off, we have our ring file. Just pop those out. When you position your ring, you're going to make sure that you're always filing the ring on the same end. We're going to butt it up against the pins here. And then we're going to keep steady pressure right about here. And we're just going to take a little bit off at a time. We don't want to take too much material off. You'll get a feel for it. But one of the things I do want to point out is these two rings are made out of different material. So one may file easier than the other. So if it takes you, say, 30 turns on this to get this ring to where you want it, don't assume this one's going to take 30 turns. It could take half that or twice that, depending on what material it's made out of. You know what, you want to take this off at a few turns at a time and then check it again. It's a slow process, but that's how we want our best results. And once we get all the cylinders done, we'll load up the pistons, we'll drop them in the hole. Now we're going, we are board 30 over, so that's why we're going a little bit bigger on the ring gap. Also, we're not sure if we're going to run boost in this in the future or not. So if we keep the ring gap a little bit bigger, then that'll be safe to put a little bit of boost into the engine. So our target range is 20 to 22 thou. All right, I'm going to continue on with the engine, get the rest of the rings done, and hopefully we'll get the pistons loaded into this. Okay, so now we're going to put the expander ring on the piston. We're going to start with that one. You're going to make sure that the ends right here, they close up together. They butt like that. They don't overlap. So we're just going to put it on, pull it away from the piston, walk it around. There we go. Next, we're going to put the first oil ring on.
And then what's the purpose of that oil ring?
Just support. Support for the expander ring. It's oil scraper rings.
Okay, so they scrape the oil and the expander ring keeps them at the same distance?
Yeah. So again, we're going to try to just kind of pull this away from our piston, so but we don't want to put too much force on it. I guess this one's going up top. There we go. I'm going to put the other one on. Now these are flexible enough you can actually start them. Pretty much start them. It's kind of hard to hold this here and not do it on the bench, but there you go. And just walk it down. That one's on. So eventually you're going to want to clock these. We'll get into that a little bit later. Next, we're going to put it on the ring that doesn't have the dot on it. It's both sides are flat. Doesn't have a taper to it. That goes in your middle. You can use a tool like this to expand the ring and put it over the piston. The next ring, we're going to use the ring expander to put these on. We just want that to be a little bit bigger than the piston. We don't want to put too much force on it. And that's going to sit right in the middle. Just like that. There we go. And our last ring, oh, that's not in the groove. I'm going to go a little bit further. You don't want to put too much pressure on these. It's always good to have them in the groove, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, there we're in the groove. So now here's our final ring. Actually, I'm going to wipe that down. It's rather dirty.
Okay. Right. Lint-free cloth, currently full of dog hair.
Yeah, wonderful. That'll work perfect. Dog hair will burn up nicely in the combustion chamber anyways.
They don't call it Mongrel Garage for nothing.
That's right, yeah. Even though I don't actually own a dog. Okay, this ring, you can see it's got a beveled edge on it. That's going to go down. You can see it's got this little dot right here. I don't know if you can see that on camera.
Yeah, I can.
Okay, and that's going to go up. This one I think I'm going to walk on. So we're going to drop it into the groove and just gently stretch it around. I'm just going to pull it away from the piston a bit, just like that. Okay, then we're going to clock these. So we're going to take our top ring and we're going to look where your piston wrist pin is. We're going to put 90 degrees out of that. We're going to take our second ring. We're going to put it on the 180 degrees from there. So,
Okay.
right.
So the gaps aren't aligned there.
Correct. That's to help prevent blow by when you first start it up and stuff. But like these will turn and seat and everything else as the engine runs, but we want to give it its best chance to seal up. So we're going to start with that. And then the same with the bottom ones here. We're going to clock them at about 30 degrees away from each other. So go like that. That one there. That one's here. And then where's our gap on that expander ring? Yeah, that is a good fit. I don't know where the gap, oh, there it is, found it. Okay, so it's not lined up with any of our other gaps, so we're fine. So we should be good. Ready to lube it up, put it in. So what type of slugs are we putting in these holes? Well, we've got a Keith Black Hyper-Eutectic Dome Piston. That's right, we're up in the compression on this bad boy. This is part number 8-KB116. We're going high performance. So a couple things I'd like to point out is, first of all, this piston is not marked. It doesn't have a front, back, arrow, up, top, down, anything like that. But what we do know is how the valve reliefs are cut into it. So we can keep that position and orientated properly, knowing how our valves are going to come in. They're going to come in like this, and gives it the clearance to open the valves. Now we're just going with a stock rod, and if you take a close look at that, you can see that there's some markings on that. Our machine shop did that, but since our machine shop has machined it and matched up the set, we want to keep that. So we've got to keep these numbers matched up. And the basic rule of thumb is that these numbers will go to the outboard side of the block, meaning it's going to sit in a hole like this. And that does match with how the piston's orientated. So we know we're good. We don't want to flip it around because then we're going to have some problems. All right, so we're going to get started. We're going to load these into the holes. Let's talk fillet and chamfer for a minute. You see we're looking at the crank journal right here. And right in here, you can see it's got a little radius. Let's see if we get a different angle at it. And that's the fillet. So if we come over to our connecting rod, and we look at this side, you can see it's fairly flat. There's nothing really there. It's pretty straight. On this side, however, we got a chamfer in it, a bevel. Now that bevel needs to go to the fillet. So when this rod goes in, it'll be positioned like that, with the bevel or the chamfer to the fillet in the crank. You got to make sure you get that right. Now, fortunately, we've got some markings on our connecting rods. You can see the one and the one, and that's going to go to the outside of the block. We've got new bearings here. Just going to give our rod a wipe, make sure there's nothing in there. Lint-free cloth again. We're going to give our bearing a wipe. There we go. We're going to install the notched in. Show you that in a second, just like the mains. See, it's got a notch there that it goes in. We're going to put a little bit of lube on that, but not just yet. Well, actually, we'll do it now. That's fine. Some assembly lube on there. Make sure we coat that whole bearing surface. Nice sticky stuff, good stuff. Okay, then we got some oil here. I'm going to put a little bit in the cylinder, and I'm going to put some on the piston rings. We've wiped down our cylinders, we've wiped down our piston, we've made sure everything's nice and clean. Okay, we're going to recheck our ring spacing. Okay, well, that's pretty much ready to go. Make a note of where our numbers are. Now I'm just going to use the old style compression. These aren't the best ring compressors, but they get the job done. There's a couple different styles. This is what I have right now. I'm going to open it up. Load up the piston. Down a bit, and I'll reposition. I've got these rubber tubes that we're going to put on the rod bolts so they won't scratch our journal going in. There we go. Okay, for loading the hole, we're just going to give the cylinder one more wipe. Some oil in it. There you go. We got our piston here, we got some boots on to protect it. We've turned the crank to the bottom of its rotation on this cylinder. Load our piston in. Make sure our ring compressor is seated. Let's do it one more time. There we go. Start tapping our piston in. Make sure we guide our rod as we go. That's it, done, it's in. Send it home. Give our cap a wipe, just like we always do. Got our new bearing, give that a wipe, both sides, make sure there's no material, nothing in there that's going to mess us up. Line up the notch, load it up. Assembly lube, there we go. Spread it around. Okay, there's our 3 and our 3. Okay, I'm not going to put the lube and stuff on here yet. We're just trying to get the cap to seat, and then we'll come along. We'll take these back. We'll take these back off. We'll lube them up and we'll torque them properly once we have all the rods in. Okay. I don't know if that showed up on the camera, but I managed to drop the one nut down into the piston and we fished it out. We're good. Like I said, I'm not going to put any real torque on these. We're just going to get them to seat. We'll just walk it on evenly. There we go. Make sure everything still turns nice. I like to turn it after each one to make sure everything's still free so that we know exactly, if something does go wrong, we know exactly where it went wrong. That's looking good. So we're going to set up to do number 2 next. We're going to put the journal at the bottom. Okay, moving on. Sweet. Well, here's a little sneak peek of what's going in the 67. There we go. But this is what's coming up, folks. So let's see how it all turns out.